After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were questions about the future of Mir. Though crews continued to visit the station, and its multi-port node assembly had open nodes, whether or not Mir would continue to grow was seriously in question. Never without drama, the station continued to provide lessons to the former Soviet, now Russian, and international crews. For instance, Progress M24's first automatic docking attempt failed on August 27, 1991, and during the second attempt on August 30th, Progress M24 bumped into Mir's forward longitudinal port 2 or 4 times at very low speed. It then drifted away. Mir's future was still uncertain. One of the positive aspects of the end of the Cold War was a new era of cooperation in space. As Russia plunged into economic crisis and stagnation following the collapse of the Soviet economic system, it was the United States, through NASA, who agreed to assist in funding Mir's completion, starting with the next module, Spectre. Spectre started life as a dedicated military research unit as part of the Soviet counterpart to the American Star Wars program. But neither country ever completed their plans. Spectre would go from being a weapons platform to a scientific research module, and the airlock that would have been used for targets would now be used to expose scientific experiments to the vacuum of space. Instead of war, Mir would really mean peace. And in July 1993, as part of joint US-Russian activities leading up to the International Space Station, NASA agreed to provide the funds to complete the Spectre and Piroda modules for Mir using US funds, which would provide 600 to 700 kilograms of US experiments that would be installed in the station of its former foe. Though originally planned for a 1994 launch, delays in getting NASA's equipment through Russian customs forced delays, and the launch didn't take place until the middle of 1995. By then, the new era of space cooperation led to the announcement of the Shuttle Mir program. In September 1993, American Vice President Al Gore and Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin announced plans for a new space station, which would eventually become the International Space Station. They also agreed, in preparation for this new project, that the United States would be heavily involved in the Mir project in the years ahead, under the codename Phase 1. The construction of the ISS would be Phase 2. Shuttle Mir missions would involve a total of 9 Shuttle Mir docking missions. The shuttle rotated crews and delivered supplies, and on one mission, STS-74, carried a docking module and a pair of solar arrays that would be attached to Mir. The cooperative missions allowed NASA and Roscosmos to learn a great deal about how to best work with international partners in space and how to minimize the risks associated with assembling a large station in orbit, as would have to be done with the ISS. The first space shuttle flight to Mir was STS-63, which involved a rendezvous mission without docking to the station. Known as the Near Mir mission, the flight used Space Shuttle Discovery, which lifted off from Launch Pad 39B on February 3, 1995, from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. A night launch, and the 20th mission for Discovery, it rendezvoused, flew around Mir, and returned to Earth. All of this was in preparation for STS-71, the first mission that would dock with the station. 5 weeks after Discovery's first flight to the station, Soyuz TM-21 carried expedition EO-18 to Mir on March 14th. The crew consisted of cosmonauts Vladimir Dezhurov and Gennady Strikalov, and NASA astronaut Norman Thagard, who became the first American to fly into space aboard a Soyuz spacecraft. During the course of their 115-day expedition, on May 20th, 1995, the Spectre science module, which would then serve as living quarters for American astronauts, was launched aboard a Proton rocket. Two 3.9 kilonewton main engines and a 400 newton attitude control thrusters guided Spectre on its initial approach and docking. Two 27 square meter solar arrays and two larger 38 square meter solar arrays attached to the module boosted the power available on Mir. Additionally, another battery system allowed for even more capture of electricity, marking what they believed would be the end of Mir's energy woes. Unlike the other modules, Spectre docked to Mir's forward port without incident on June 1st. The next day, the module was moved opposite Cavant 2, and Crystal was moved to the forward port to give extra room for the shuttle. Once in orbit, Spectre served as the living quarters for American astronauts until a collision with a Progress ship in late 1997. STS-71 was the third mission of the US-Russian Shuttle Mir program, and the first US space shuttle docking to the station. Space Shuttle Atlantis launched from Launch Pad 39A at Cape Canaveral on June 27, 1995. In the cargo bay of Shuttle Atlantis was the Space Hab. This module gave extra space for astronauts aboard the space shuttle and allowed for the carrying of extra supplies. Atlantis slowly approached the space station, underneath and slightly behind. After 2 days in a rendezvous orbit, Atlantis successfully docked with Mir, becoming the first US spacecraft to dock with a Russian spacecraft since the Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. Atlantis delivered cosmonauts Anatoly Solovyov and Nikolai Budarin, who would form the expedition EO-19 crew, and retrieved astronaut Norman Thagard and cosmonauts Vladimir Dezhurov and Gennady Strikalov. Atlantis also carried out on-orbit joint US-Russian life sciences investigations aboard its Space Lab module and performed a logistical resupply of the station. Atlantis returned to Earth on the 7th of July with a crew of 8. It was the first of 7 straight missions to Mir flown by Atlantis. On September 3, 1995, Soyuz TM-22 launched from Baikonur and carried the relief crew to Mir together with a European Space Agency astronaut, Thomas Reiter, as part of the Mir 95 mission. Following a 2-day solo flight, Soyuz TM-22 docked with the Mir space station on September 5th, and the crew became the 20th Mir resident crew. During the next months, joint Russian-German research work was performed. A week after TM-22 docked, Soyuz TM-21 with Solovyov and Nikolai undocked and landed on September 11, 1995. It's easy to forget the numerous resupply missions carried out by Progress flights. For instance, Progress M29, which launched on October 8, 1995. It performed its functions of docking with the rear port on October 10th, loaded with supplies for the crew. The final shuttle flight of 1995, STS-74, was also with Atlantis, launching on November 12th.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of Space Shuttle Atlantis with the Russian docking module, the threshold to world cooperation in space.
Atlantis, go at throttle up.
Roger, go at throttle up.
Atlantis 3 main engines are now back at full throttle. Atlantis altitude 12 miles, 9 miles downrange from the launch pad. Atlantis is now traveling 2,400 miles per hour. Booster officer confirms a good separation of the twin solid rockets.
It delivered the Russian-built docking module to Mir, along with a pair of new solar arrays and other hardware upgrades for the station. The docking module was designed to provide more clearance for shuttles in order to prevent any collision with Mir's solar arrays during docking, a problem that had been overcome during STS-71 by relocating Kristall. The module, attached to Kristall's docking port, prevented the need for this procedure on future missions. Now famous astronaut Chris Hadfield manipulated the Canada arm, and a manipulator arm developed by the Canadian Space Agency, which would attach to shuttle cargo and manipulate it into place. Here, Hadfield grabbed the Mir module and attached it to the shuttle's docking port. Once attached to the shuttle port, Atlantis moved closer to Mir and prepared to dock. Through the course of the flight, nearly 1,000 pounds of water were transferred to Mir, and experiment samples including blood, urine, and saliva were moved to Atlantis for a return to Earth. After a week attached to Mir, Atlantis undocked and slowly moved away from the station. After a final goodbye, the crew made plans for their re-entry and landing back on Earth. Re-entry was always a difficult thing for the space shuttle, not using the conical design so familiar on Soyuz and Apollo before it. But for the crew of STS-74, re-entry went normal and landing occurred as planned. Closing out the year 1995, Progress M29, by then filled with trash, undocked from Mir on December 19th and was destroyed on re-entry a few hours later. The new era of space cooperation would continue, and it does to this day. But there was still work to do on Mir, attaching the final module, the pre-Rhoda.
Has been an experience that none of us will ever forget. Yuri, Sergey, and Thomas, it has been wonderful to see you again, to work with you and fly with you. The Russians, I think it's most difficult to say goodbye, and the Russians have a much better expression, which is "До свидания."